Sending the National Guard to Chicago, should the power to declare rebellion be a president's alone? Don't cry for Argentina, the U.S. is sending billions to bail it out, and teens confiding to AI chatbots about self-harm. Why aren't their parents being told? Stay tuned, Ivory Tower's next.
This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to Ivory Tower. I'm David Chanatry from Utica University. I'm joined around the table this week by Nina Moore from Colgate University, Chad Sparber from Colgate University, Jenny Stromer-Galley from Syracuse University, and Sarah Pralle, also from Syracuse University. The scope of presidential powers at stake in a Supreme Court decision expected soon, possibly even today. The Trump administration has asked the court to allow it to deploy National Guard troops to Chicago over the objection of the Illinois governor. It's using a precedent from the War of 1812 to argue the president has the exclusive authority to call up the Guard. State officials say that infringes on their power. So, Nina, should the power to declare a rebellion be the president's alone?
No, it should not be the exclusive authority of the president to declare rebellion. However, the president should have the primary authority to execute the Constitution and federal laws, and in this case, protecting ICE agents and the enforcement of immigration laws. The problem is the target of the administration keeps moving because the president has said that he wants to combat crime in cities that are overrun with crime. They're burning down because of crime. But then in the legal pleadings, you see a very different argument, one that's focused more on federal enforcement. And so if it's about crime, then that's troubling because that's at the heart of states' police powers. That's what states should do. And also, folks who are in the military reserve are not trained to fight crime. But as I said, if it is about federal law enforcement, then absolutely the president should have the power to ensure the safety of federal agents.
Okay, is there seems to be a dispute as to the facts of the situation in Chicago, right? I mean, Jenny, the president's saying this is huge, rebellion, insurrection. Right. I don't think he used the word insurrection, but no. But then the governor's saying, there's isolated incidents.
Right. Well, so this idea of rebellion is at the heart of the argument that is the rationale for Trump to mobilize the National Guard, and that the local community is unable to protect federal resources. And so that is the grounding. But rebellion would suggest that there is some kind of active, intensive, organized, coordinated, and sustained resistance that is more than just peaceful protest, citizens exercising their First Amendment rights. And so it is deeply concerning to me that you have a president using these arguments around safety and rebellion to functionally, from my perspective, engage in lawless acts.
But you did. Sorry. I'm trying to understand that better because, I don't see this as an easy case. On the one hand, I recognize that our founders set up the Constitution to be inefficient, to be slow, deliberative decision making, and all that kind of thing. But there are also exceptions, like Article 2, which gives the president the role of commander in chief. If you take Trump out of the mix for a minute, do we really want the president to answer to some other slow decision-making body in the middle of a crisis to define what a rebellion is, or whether it's ensued, or whether... pragmatically, this is an honest question. Pragmatically, how would we do this if it's not the exclusive to the executive?
Well, I mean, since we're talking about the framers, certainly in Federalist Number 70, Hamilton was talking about energy, but in this case, there is no emerging crisis. Even when the National Guard was deployed back in 1992, it was for the LA riots, which, by the way, were not very organized, but there was an emerging crisis. Crime is not that. And so for the president to have that sort of power really means that the president can deploy the National Guard at any point for any reason pertaining to crime.
what he wants to do. Right, Sarah?
Right, and you're assuming, Chad, I think that presidents are acting on good faith, right? And in fact, the judge in this case, it's a review panel, said that they could not trust the president's lawyers, the government's lawyers, to actually describe the facts on the ground accurately. That's remarkable, right? Typically, judges should be able to trust the evidence and the arguments that the government is providing, and they said they cannot. They completely exaggerated the situation on the ground. And so this is troublesome too, because these are judges that get to look at the facts on the ground and determine it. Once it goes up to the Supreme Court, they stop looking at the facts and they just rule basically on principle. And I think that they're going to determine, if this goes to the Supreme Court, that he has the power to do this, right? And so now you have this sort of lawless president who is targeting blue cities because it's like this us versus them kind of mindset, right? Where he really thinks that if you disagree with him, you are disloyal. And there's a partisan component, but also a geographical component, right? There's this urban versus rural divide. It's an us versus them thing. And I just think that I understand your point, but this president is not acting in good faith.
That's why I say, no, I'm not assuming that. And I'm saying take Trump out of the mix. I'm thinking about like pragmatic issues and what the Constitution says. I've actually been thinking, this might be crazy, but I was thinking about the Whiskey Rebellion, which 1791, it's the first time that the federal government puts a tax on a product. Farmers in rural western Pennsylvania are upset about it. They're using violence and intimidation to destroy federal property and to threaten federal officers. President Washington himself mounts a horse, goes out west to enforce the law with the backing of the militia. Now, it turns out in that case, the governor of Pennsylvania was okay with it. But what if he hadn't been? Would President Washington have had to ask Congress for permission to enforce the law? Would he have to go to the courts to say, hey, is this a law that I could enforce? And I would think that the founders of the Constitution would have said that enforcement of the law is the executive's responsibility. And
well, in the case that the administration is using as citing as precedent from the 1827,
Right.
the court said that the president has the exclusive authority.
Yeah, however, that precedent was later qualified to draw distinctions between domestic problems and foreign invasions. And then later in 1878, Congress passed an act that sort of focused in on that. But to Chad's point, I think here, while there's no emerging crisis, there is the politics of it and the fact that Trump has, I think, very smartly pointed out that it's mostly minorities that are being impacted by crime, despite the fact that the numbers are going down. You still have homicides as the #1 cause of death for young black men. And that's going to matter to the Supreme Court, depending upon how the Solicitor General crafts his argument.
Okay, now the United States is effectively giving Argentina a $20 billion bailout by buying its currency, officially swapping dollars for pesos. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is trying to arrange another $20 billion in private investment. The money is intended to stabilize the peso. Argentina often has had trouble paying its bills and has a long history of defaulting on its debt. So, Chad, doesn't this seem like a risky bet for the American taxpayer? Should this be something we should be doing given our own financial circumstance?
So look, Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, I mean, he's crazy, but he's also the best hope that Argentina's had in over 100 years. He's cut government spending. He's generated a fiscal surplus. Poverty's lowest that it's been in 7 years. Inflation is down, which in Argentina is remarkable. Argentina has received 23 bailouts, at least 23 bailouts since 1958. That's a lot. And yet last year, 6 months ago rather, The Economist ran an article titled how Milei made Argentina deserving of an IMF bailout. And so, like him or not, we actually need him to succeed. And I think in this case, it might.
Wait, why do we need him to succeed?
Okay, so.
That's just what I was going to ask.
My question too.
It's a national security question at some level. In the face of a rising China, it's in the U.S. National security interest to maintain your sphere of influence, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, where China has made inroads with its Belt and Road Initiative. Argentina is rich in uranium, lithium, other rare earth metals. It behooves us to support Pralle, who's pro-market, pro-America. He's even trying to forge defense ties with NATO. The pronest alternative would be a setback and put Argentina right back into the arms.
He's also turned around and selling his soybeans
to China.
To China.
Soybeans? Okay. Soybeans to China, that is, so what?
Well, because Senator Chuck Grassley actually thinks that's a big deal for farmers in Iowa. And while the national security argument, which I just heard articulated by you here at this table, may be persuasive, that is not what President Trump has said is his reason. And I'm quoting, he said he's, quote, just helping a great philosophy take over a great economy, and that he thinks that Argentina is very beautiful. Well, wonderful. Okay, it probably is, but we're back to the question of why. Why Argentina? When Clinton did this over the objections of Congress, he did so because he was helping a major trade partner, i.e. Mexico. There was coordination with the IMF, and also it was conditioned on basically Mexico giving over some of the money from its oil reserves. There's none of that here. But most troubling to me as an institutionalist is that there's no consultation really with Congress. And when you've got a Marjorie Taylor Greene saying there's a problem here, then clearly there must be a problem here.
And just to put it in a little context, we're talking about $20 billion that the Treasury Secretary can just unilaterally give to them, right? Again, with no accountability or consultation. We gave $100 billion in foreign aid in 2024. 20 billion of that was USAID, which they completely cut. That's for the entire rest of the world, which is also in our national security, to give money to feed people, to make sure that rebellions don't break out, that diseases don't break out. That's also in the U.S.'s national security. So there's no consistency, not that I necessarily expect that from the president. And I think it's kind of to what Nina said, it's basically a twofer for him. Like, it's a win-win. He gets the ideological, he gets his friend, his MAGA friend in Argentina, and then he gets to bail out the billionaires who have close ties to the Secretary of Treasury. I mean, and there's some evidence to suggest that they actually got in touch with Secretary of the Treasury to urge him to do this. So
because they had
have big investments in Argentina.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I completely agree with what Sarah just said. There is also as you mentioned, the buddy part, right? So Milei was here. He's the one who gave J.D. Vance the chainsaw.
Musk had the
Sorry,
chainsaw.
Musk.
Same difference.
Oh, isn't that funny? So there is a bit of old boys network here at work with our American tax dollars.
But hold on, but I can agree with everything that you all have said, and all at the same time, irrelevant. Like, okay, Trump's a buffoon, so like,
I didn't say
no. Yeah. He's close friends with the president. It's crony capitalism. It's all that stuff. Yeah, sure. Okay. It is still in the U.S.
But it's not even clear that it's going to work, Chad.
No, it's not.
Argentina defaulted
but it is
9
the best
times.
chance that Argentina has had in over 100 years.
Yeah, here's to hoping that it actually works. And to your point, Sarah, there is this thing called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which presidents can use unilaterally. But as I said, where's the justification? If you could call the Trump folks and start saying this is the reason that it's national security.
The justification. Look, and where I wish you would go is to say that for this to be successful, what Argentina needs to do is implement more reforms, which would include a floating exchange rate, or maybe even dollarization, which is a way to prevent this sort of thing from happening again. Because the reason they need money is they're artificially
why
propping
not
up
condition it then?
That's the objection that I think.
And Milei, it looks like he might not win the midterm elections, might go to the other party. So then if a new party comes in, then all those reforms.
But
that's why we're trying to
exactly.
It is in our interest for him to win.
It's a big risk, right?
Yes, it's a risk.
We could actually make money on this, right? I mean,
we could, but I wouldn't bet on that.
Mostly there's been losses on that score.
Yeah, 23 bailouts. Come on.
Yeah.
Chatbots are computer programs that simulate conversation. They've been around a while, but now with the tremendous advance in artificial intelligence and natural language processing, it's leading to some disturbing questions. 3 families have sued AI companies after their teenage children committed suicide. They claim the chatbots discouraged the teens from talking to their parents or did not alert them or authorities to the potential self-harm. So Jenny, when we're talking about a chat box, the people that have developed these, the tech companies, have been saying that there's a right to privacy involved here with the conversation with a machine. Does that argument hold water?
So the arguments that they've been making is that they have put in safeguards to reduce the issues that are cropping up, and especially since the lawsuits have cropped up. So after the suicide of, I think, Alex Rain in California, after OpenAI released their Model 4.0, so that was a much more friendly, social, engaging chatbot. And the family actually argued that part of the concern they have is that OpenAI reduced their safeguards or potentially putting conflicting instructions to the chatbot that then meant that this particular teenager, when he was having this conversation with the AI, it was, rather than suggesting that he talk to family, get help, call a crisis hotline, was supporting and engaging with him by suggesting that his views and perspectives are valid and important, including that if he wishes to die, that might be the right thing for him to do.
Well, that's pretty horrible.
Yes, it's
yeah,
very horrible.
So
privacy, from my perspective, isn't quite the story here. For me, there isn't really a right to privacy in this space at all. I mean, it's a company that you are engaging with. The company can choose to what extent they want to maintain privacy. There is no kind of legal privacy.
So what sort of regulation? Should there be regulation, and what form would it take? Sarah?
I mean, I actually think these lawsuits are sort of doing the job for that, or possibly in place of it. I'm not saying we don't need regulation, but that's sometimes the whole point of the lawsuits is to spur changes. And from what I've read, it sounds like they are responding to these lawsuits and trying to put in some safeguards, including things like, pop-ups that say, I'm not a real human being, go talk to someone, because some of the, as Jenny's suggesting, some of the issues were pretty serious, the way it was interacting. I mean, when he asked Adam, I guess, asked his parents, or said that like his parents might blame themselves.
Right, yes. Yep.
The chat GPT said, that doesn't mean you owe them survival. So that's pretty extreme. And I think that it feels like the AI companies are kind of getting the message, and I guess I would say I also read a study. I didn't quite understand it because it was pretty technical, but where they did a test of 3 different AI chatbots in terms of how they responded to suicidal thoughts, and they tested against experts, and actually 2 out of the 3 did better, were more accurate in their assessments about appropriate responses to suicidal thoughts. So Claude was one of them, and ChatGPT was another.
So speaking of studies, one study, Nina, found that 1 in 3 teens use chatbots for, companionship.
Yeah, and that to me is really the primary problem, that you've got young folks who are turning to computers for companionship. And a couple of years ago, Biden's Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, he declared that the U.S. is in the middle of a loneliness epidemic. And it's not just impacting young people, but also roughly half of adults, and especially adults who make under $30,000 and who have to work extended hours. And so there's an undercurrent here that I think also needs to be addressed. And so Harvard did a study, and they suggested that cities and states should deal more with social infrastructure and find public spaces where folks can interact more.
The new technologies are always scary, and we have to figure out how to have those new technologies complement what we do. Otherwise, they're going to replace what we do. So any kind of suggestion of an outright ban strikes me as absurd and backwards. And instead, when you talk about the regulations that we need, I think we need to carefully identify the areas of systematic concern and things like, okay, so that same article said compulsive unlocking is a problem. So that unlocking and locking of phones. You could put something on your device that limits the number of times you unlock your phone within a certain amount of time. Morning AI use is linked to stress. If that's a causal link, then you could limit the kind of times a day that a teen could access it. And then actually, as a pragmatic matter, the fact that they're using their phones to do this most of the time makes it a lot easier to enforce, because it could be software on the phone itself as opposed to, you know, the olden days when we all shared one computer to access technologies.
There's another dimension, which is that these AI are being trained and programmed to communicate very much like a friend. And so going back to your point, Nina, they help facilitate almost like a simulacrum of a pretend reality in which you're having a conversation with a real human. And if you're in an emotionally unsatisfying, unstable state, if you have mental health issues, you can very quickly, I think, find yourself having a perception that you're talking with something that really is human or even like superhuman. So there's been a number of stories now of people who end up having almost like a mental break with reality. They're spending so much time talking with these chatbots, and they get convinced that they have superpowers or they've invented new mathematics that's going to revolutionize the world. And that's because they've been trained to specifically communicate as if they are human. So from my perspective, the way to fix this is to dial that back. It needs to feel more like a robot than like a human when you communicate with it.
And of course,
And not only do they communicate like humans, but they're like really acknowledge them and encourage them, and it's very
Flattering.
Flattering and very positive feedback.
all right, we need to go to the A's and F's. Nina, you're F.
Okay, the federal government is quietly expanding its biometric exit program, which involves federal officers taking photos of passengers boarding international flights in order to match the photos to their passports using facial recognition software. The program began under the Obama administration and since 2017 has expanded to impact some 810 million people. It is intrusive. It's prone to false positives, especially for people of color and women. It could be used for more than just biometric exit and largely unregulated, but it should be.
Chad.
As our viewers are likely aware, New York is now distributing checks of up to $400 as part of Governor Hochul's proposal to help residents deal with rising prices. My objection here isn't about the rebate. I want lower taxes, but rather it's about calling it an inflation refund check, because as any student of macro knows, expansionary fiscal policies like this serve to increase prices. To be fair, I think we're talking about a dollar amount that's small enough that it's not going to move the needle on national price levels, but I'm still annoyed by the governor's populist messaging.
Jenny.
So my F goes to Elon Musk's argument to convince Tesla shareholders to pay him $1 trillion and keep him as CEO. His argument? So he can control a robot army. Never mind that Tesla does not have a robot army and that literally nothing about his leadership with this company makes any sense. But he likely will get his vision for $1 trillion and to continue as CEO. But then the question is, what's he going to do with that army?
Let's go to Mars. Sarah.
If we've learned anything in the last 10 months, it's that President Trump is determined to make as much money for himself, his family, and his billionaire friends while in office. This week, he surprised perhaps even the most cynical among us by demanding the Justice Department pay him $230 million in compensation for past federal investigations into him, paid with taxpayer money. And the story gets worse because any settlement might be approved by officials who defended him in those lawsuits, including Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General.
Now we'll go to the A's. Nina.
Yeah, I'm actually going to give an A to the Trump administration and their crackdown on big pharma ads. Although Secretary of Health Robert F. Kennedy really wants an outright ban on prescription drug ads, the new regulations that call for greater disclosure of side effects are to help, quote, ensure that patients have proper information about drugs that have potential harms, end quote.
Chad.
So my students last night did a Ivory Tower in the classroom experiment with our own David Chanatry coming in to guest moderate. They were brilliant. I stole their good ideas today. So anything good I said today, that's from the students. Anything crazy, that's just me.
I borrowed a couple of their ideas as well. Excuse me. Jenny, you're
All
right.
right. So my aid goes to the military veterans that I taught this week through a program at Syracuse University that helps veterans and their families think through the ins and outs of running for political office. These service members represent the best of America, a diverse group of people with different backgrounds, religions, and beliefs about what ails our communities and our nation, but who share a common love of our nation, our democracy, and who understand intimately that service, including running for office, is a noble calling.
Jenny. Sarah.
7 million people took the streets last Saturday in what was the second largest one-day protest in American history. The No Kings protests were peaceful and patriotic, and I want to give a special shout out to the folks who showed up in whimsical blow-up costumes. Many were inspired by the Portland Frog Brigade, a group of people who were protesting Portland's ice facilities in frog costumes. And not only did these costumes draw people in by making the protests look really fun, they're a way to diffuse tension, and shout out to them.
Thank you for joining us this evening. For comments, you can write to the address on your screen. If you'd like to watch the show again, you can do so online at WCNY.org. I'm David Chanatry, and for all of us at Ivory Tower, have a good night.
This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.